I don't really have a good way to start this video. I wanted to try and give some sort of interesting tidbit on my perspective or experience with the game, but I realized I don't really have one to share. Rage is not a game that connected with me in any meaningful way. I didn't get lost in its world, I didn't get enamored with the characters, and I didn't spend hours shooting bandits and mutants on end in an addictive gameplay loop. In fact, I kind of feel sort of detached from Rage in a way that doesn't really happen to me very often playing video games. And maybe that's what makes Rage interesting, the fact that it didn't do much for me even though I enjoyed most of my time with it. I've played Rage about 3 to 4 times over the years, which may seem like a lot considering I just said it didn't connect with me, but I tend to replay a lot of my games, it's just how I am. Rage 2 is being released this year, and it looks like it's shaping up to be what I had wanted the original Rage to be. Well, mostly anyways. So I decided to replay Rage one more time in preparation for the release of Rage 2. This video is not spoiler free, so if you haven't played it, well, there really isn't that much to spoil, but you've been warned anyways. I played Rage on Xbox One for this video thanks to backwards compatibility on normal difficulty. Rage came on 3 discs on the 360 when it was released. There isn't that much content in the game, so I assume it was because the game pushed the 360 to its limits graphically thanks to its megatexture technology. But when replaying the game now, I have to say it really doesn't seem like it. When you look at a large environment, like when you're driving around in the pseudo-open world, the game looks very good. And the character models and guns and cars all look really good. But when you take a closer look at things, the picture isn't that flattering. A lot of textures in the game just look bad, even for when this game was released. There's also a ton of pop-in and load-in, but the animations are pretty damn great. Enemies will crawl on the ceiling, sprint right at you, roll from cover to cover, and react differently depending on how and where you damage them. The game runs really well, and stayed at 60 frames per second the entire game. Overall, the game doesn't look great, but it does look good. The sound design is really good. All the cars have a nice beefy engine sound, and the guns especially sound great, which is important considering that most of the game is spent driving and shooting things. John Goodman voices the first character you interact with in the game, and he does a pretty good job along with all the other voice actors. However, the game reuses the same voice actors for multiple characters. I think I heard Nolan North and Steve Blum voice 3 or 4 characters each during my playthrough. The music is great. It's bombastic and unsettling in a good way when fighting enemies, it's beautiful and somber for certain story moments, and it's rocking and rolling for driving sections. It's actually pretty diverse in its instrumentation and moods it tries to evoke, and I think it's successful with all of them. The gameplay is really where the game shines. There are 3 things you'll be doing in Rage: walking around towns to get quests, driving in the wasteland or races, and shooting things. Shooting all the things. Let's start with driving. It feels good. There are 5 different vehicles in the game: an ATV, a dune buggy, a rat rod, which is more or less the same thing as the buggy, the Caprino, which is basically an upgraded version of the buggy, and the Monarch, which is basically a tank without treads. There are a bunch of racing events in town which are actually pretty fun, but incredibly easy, for the most part. There's regular circuit racing, time trials, minigun and rocket races, which are just circuit races with weapons and items, and rocket rallies, which are the worst thing ever. Rocket rallies require you to race around the map collecting points by driving over blue markers. These markers usually spawn in the same order every time, so some amount of strategy is involved. For instance, if you chase down markers to the end of the map, you know that they're going to appear in the same order on the other side of the map. So sometimes it's better to just let the AI racers get the points and bide your time until the markers respawn near you. At least that's how it works in the earlier races. In some of the later ones, I swear that they randomly spawn, which is just terrible because it removes the strategy element from the races, meaning whether or not you win the race comes down to chance. This is the only race mode that I ever lost in the entire game, and let me tell you, those later rocket rallies were frustrating as hell. Each race you win awards you with racing certificates, which can be used to buy upgrades and skins for your vehicles. You can also earn certificates by destroying bandit cars in the wasteland after you've started a certain side mission. Rage has an almost open world style of design. I say almost open world because A, the only thing to do in it is destroy bandit cars and ram into these floating things, and B, the world is separated into 2 different locations, the northern wasteland and the eastern wasteland. You can't simply drive from one wasteland to the other. You need to travel there, and on the 360 you had to swap discs to get to a different wasteland, completely breaking the fragile illusion of an open world. Each wasteland is about the same size, and the only real difference is that one of them has a bluish color palette. You won't be doing anything different from one wasteland to the other. In fact, this game sort of feels like an LA Noire or Mafia 2 type of deal, where all you're really doing is just driving from one mission to another. There are 2 towns in Rage where you'll get the majority of your quests and side missions from. Wellspring, which is in the northern wasteland, and Subway Town, which I literally had to Google the name of because of how little an impression it made on me. Again, this is my 3rd or 4th time playing the game. There are a few mini games to do in these towns that don't really add much to the experience but are enjoyable for what they are nonetheless. There's a 5-finger fillet mini game which is not as good as the one in Red Dead Redemption. There's a weird board game that's basically a slot machine and is completely random. And there's a card game which is actually kind of fun but admittedly is shallow as hell. One thing that doesn't seem like a big deal, because it isn't really in the grand scheme of things, is that whenever you want to sell or buy something from a shop, the vendors say a little line before allowing you to get on with what you want to do. Like I said, it's not a big deal, but it pissed me off that I had to listen to the same damn line every single time before I could just buy what I needed for my next mission. Speaking of which, Rage has main missions and side missions. Main missions involve speaking to a quest giver, driving to the location, entering the location, which are basically dungeons like in Skyrim or Fallout, making it all the way to the end of the dungeon while shooting everything that gets in your way, and conveniently ending up back at the beginning. Nothing special, just your bog standard mission design. Not bad, but nothing unique. The side missions, however, are so lazy and boring and have so little in the way of meaningful rewards that they just aren't worth doing unless you need cash. See, every main mission brings you to new locations you haven't encountered yet, while almost every single side mission just reuses the dungeons you've already been in, only with a new MacGuffin to find at the end. Except sometimes it isn't even a new one. Some side missions make you go through the same goddamn dungeon to find the same item you already found once before. It's so lazy. There isn't a single unique location for any side mission in the entire game. And most of these side missions aren't given to you by speaking to a character in a town. You select them from a job board that has a little bit of text on there and no connection to the main story whatsoever. It's a huge letdown. But I'll tell you what isn't a huge letdown: the gunplay. Rage's gunplay is usually fast-paced, in-your-face, and bloody. There's a good assortment of weaponry here. A pistol, which is the first weapon in the game naturally. A crossbow, which is actually one of the least satisfying crossbows I've ever used in the game, at least with the basic ammo. An assault rifle, a machine gun, a sniper rifle, a rocket launcher, a shotgun, and if you bought the Anarchy edition, which I have, a double barrel shotgun, and this game's version of the BFG, which, like the crossbow, when compared to its other games, isn't actually that satisfying to use. Each gun has a few upgrades you can buy from shops to help improve its various stats. I found myself regularly switching between weapons my entire playthrough, and used each a fair amount. Even the pistol, which remained useful to me because of its alternate ammo, the Fat Boy and Fat Mama. For instance, even though I'm not too hot on the crossbow's base ammo, it also has electro bolts, which stuns enemies or kills them if they're standing in water when hit, and has a mind control bolt which allows you to take over an enemy, move them near other enemies, and blow them up. The game allows you to carry all your weapons on you at all times. You just need to pick 4 for your quick select wheel. But you can also equip any weapon from any time from your inventory screen. You can also select your alternate ammo from your quick select wheel. Using the right stick will select a weapon, and using the left stick will select the ammo type. Now I actually have a little bit of an issue with the way this works. Rage's gunplay is very fast-paced, and the game does not pause or slow down the action while you're selecting your weapon from the quick select wheel. So sometimes the actual best way to select a weapon you want is to go into your inventory and equip it that way so you don't take damage. It's not a big deal per se, as I never died because of this, but it was kind of annoying. Rage has a defibrillator mechanic where if you die and it's fully charged, you can play a short minigame to revive yourself and stun all nearby enemies. Later on in the game, you gain a second defibrillator charge, but I honestly never needed it. Rage also has a crafting system that's more expansive than you'd think. You can craft ammo and equipment once you either find or buy that item's recipe. Equipment are items that help you out in combat, ranging from different types of grenades to bandages that regenerate your health immediately, to wing sticks, which is Rage's cool, unique, deadly boomerang-esque weapon, and many more. Enemy AI is pretty good. The armed enemies will hide behind cover, retreat if you're pushing, push up if you're retreating, hide behind shielded allies, and throw grenades when you're behind cover. The melee enemies will rush towards you, dodge your shots, try to flank you, crawl on the ceiling, and attack you as a group. There are a couple boss fights in the game, but they're more annoying than fun or challenging to me. The first boss is the Kraken you encounter when you compete in the Bash TV part of the story. He'll rush towards you, swipe his tentacles at you, and spit slime at you to inhibit your vision. He isn't hard to defeat, and his tentacle and spit attacks don't really do anything more than just irritate me. The second boss is this big-ass mutant you fight in the old hospital. You grab the rocket launcher and shoot him, dodge his attacks, and win. It's spectacle over mechanics, which I don't normally have an issue with in games. However, Rage has a big problem with its combat, and the boss fights could have been a nice change of pace. But there are only 2 boss fights in the entire game, so there goes that. The problem I'm talking about is repetition. There are really only 2 types of enemies in the game, enemies with guns and enemies without guns, with slight variations of each. The authority soldiers can be weakened with EMP grenades, and there are armored enemies that require more damage to take out, but that's it for variety in the enemies with guns category. The melee enemies fare even worse. There's only one variation that matters, which is a more mutated version of the mutants that can spit acid like the Kraken. Each of the bandit factions are aesthetically different, but that's it. For a game so focused on its gunplay, it's crazy to me that the developers didn't come up with more enemy types to fight. Car combat also faces the same repetition problem. The only thing you do is fight other cars, who behave the same way the entire game. There aren't any wrinkles that get added besides the few weapons and equipment types you can use during car combat. The Earth was struck by a giant meteor that triggered an apocalypse. The governments of the world came up with an ARC program similar to the vaults from Fallout, called the Eden Project, which hid various arcs all across the world underground, filled with humanity's best and brightest. You play as one of those ARC survivors, who emerges into the wasteland years after the meteor hit the Earth. For some reason, the Eden Project didn't go as planned, and a new regime called the Authority has risen to power across the wasteland. The Authority is opposed by the Resistance, which the player becomes a part of after a few hours of the game. You do a bunch of missions for people in the Wastelands and the Resistance, then head into the Authority's base and activate all the arcs from there somehow. And that's it. That's the entire game's story. There really aren't any characters in the game as far as I'm concerned. They have names and they have voices and dialogue, but they either just stand or sit there or give you quests. I don't remember any single character as being interesting or standing out in any meaningful way in the entire game. You don't form any bonds with anyone, and the game doesn't give you any reason to care about any of them. The story is so generic and bland and uninteresting and bad that I can barely remember anything about it despite having played this game from start to finish multiple times. And the game just ends. Like, you press the button that activates all the arcs, there's like a 30-second cutscene of the arcs coming out of the ground, and the game's over. You can't even continue playing after the credits. You have to reload a save before the final mission. It's a terrible ending. The game doesn't even have a villain, really. There are mentions of a General Cross, who's the leader of the Authority, but you never see him or even hear from him in the entire game. He's only a name. The story feels unfinished, and it's a shame because everything you need is there. 2 factions vying for control of the wasteland with a few settlements and towns sprinkled throughout. It feels very Fallout-like, but ends up being Fallout-light. I am not a big multiplayer gamer. I am far more interested in the single-player parts of all games, even the ones that are multiplayer-focused. So I consider my own opinion on multiplayer aspects of games to not really be worth that much. But from what little I've played of Rage's multiplayer, it's pretty fun. The multiplayer can be separated into 2 parts. Car combat, which is called Road Rage in-game, and co-op missions, which are called Wasteland Legends. Car combat has its own progression system where you unlock new vehicles, equipment, skins, and perks. I only played a little of this mode, so I can't say how well any of this works. There are 4 game types in Road Rage: Carnage, Meteor Rally, Chain Rally, and Triad Rally. Carnage is just car combat. I didn't actually get to play this mode during my time with the multiplayer, so I can't comment on it. Though if it's like the combat in the main game, it would probably get old fast. The second game type is Meteor Rally, which involves driving over fallen meteors and bringing them to score zones to collect points. The car combat is present in all modes, and players can destroy each other's vehicles to steal any meteors that player had collected but hadn't turned in yet. Chain Rally involves racing over multiple blue rally points in a row to score points and increase your score multiplier. If another player captures a rally point before you do, you lose your multiplier and now they are the ones trying to chain together rally points. Triad Rally requires players to drive over 3 rally points consecutively to score points. You have to collect 3 points or else you won't get any points, and if another car gets to a point first, then you lose your collected rally points. These game modes are shallow but fun, at least for the short time I played them. I can't imagine that Rage was a popular multiplayer game back in the day, considering this is all it has to offer for competitive multiplayer. Side note, why aren't there circuit races in multiplayer? You already have tracks created for it in the campaign, so why not transpose that into multiplayer? The second part of Rage's multiplayer is Wasteland Legends, which is a collection of short co-op campaign missions that are separate from the main game. The concept here is that each of these missions is supposed to fill in some of the world by explaining some of the events that have happened to various characters in the Wasteland. In practice, all this boils down to is the same fetch quest missions from the main game, except now you can do it with a second player, either online or split screen, which I appreciate since I'm much more of a fan of couch multiplayer than online. These missions do reuse the same dungeons from the main game, which is pretty disappointing considering this is the second example of the game being lazy in this regard. I was hoping that Rage would get a sequel ever since I first played it, because this game has so much untapped potential. I like a lot of the ideas here, but most of them aren't as fully realized as they should be. The story is incredibly bland and uninspired. Characters have no personality and are only there for exposition dumps and quest giving. The side quests are so lazily put together and have no good rewards that they're really not worth doing. Combat gets incredibly repetitive, the game doesn't let you continue after the main story is done, so there's no endgame, and the graphics are a mixed bag. But all of this can be improved on in Rage 2, which is looking really good. Well, you know. I know that this review comes off as pretty critical, but I have to stress that even though a lot of these flaws are disappointing, they don't ruin the game for me. I still had a good time playing this game thanks to its fun driving and gunplay. If you enjoy shooters, you should definitely give this game a try, especially since you can find it for pretty cheap now. I don't think that breaking a game down to its individual components and giving each a rating, then finding an average from all of them and giving the game a score based on that is the ideal way to do it. I wouldn't fault anyone for doing it like that. It does seem to make sense to do it that way. However, that isn't how I come up with my scores for games, because I think it leaves out the idea that video games are art. There's an incredibly important X factor to games and entertainment as a whole, which is how much it connected with you and how much you enjoyed it. As I said in the beginning of the video, Rage didn't connect with me in a special way like some of my favorite games have, like the Mass Effect series or Alan Wake. But despite its flaws, I did enjoy my time with the game, and that's honestly the most important and honest part of reviewing a game for me. I'm gonna give Rage a 6 out of 10. So that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. I know that there was DLC for Rage, but and I heard it was pretty good, but I just don't really care enough to play it. I'm just waiting for Rage 2. Let me know what you thought of the video. Tell me what you think about Rage, and are you excited for Rage 2? Thanks. Leave a like and subscribe, I guess.